Yes, well, what you're seeing is a beautiful painting of the landscape scenery of Albania, painted by Edward Lear, a name you may remember as the author of certain nonsense poetry, The Owl and the Pussycat. He was a painter. That was his main profession. And he spent a lot of time in Albania. He did a tour in which he painted a number of very stunning pictures of the scenery, very rugged, mountainous and rocky scenery in Albania. I want to start by mentioning an article that's in the latest issue of Lynn's Stamp News. I don't know how many of you, I'm sure some of you get Lynn's. There's a very good article about Albania by Rick Miller, who's a specialist in Eastern Europe. He writes articles frequently on Eastern European topics. The article in particular concerns the Italian occupation. The Italians had their eyes on Albania for a long time. And finally, under the fascist regime of Mussolini, they just marched in and took over in 1937. And there was nobody to stop them from doing it. The Albanians had been relying on Italy for their security in the first place. So they had no way of resisting. And the government in Albania, in an attempt to stop the continual killing of people by feuding, the long tradition of the blood feud in Albania was leading to hundreds of killings every year. And in order to put a stop to that, the government clamped down very hard and literally confiscated the guns. They disarmed the population, which was good as far as stopping the feuding was concerned. But then, there was no possibility of defense when the Italians came in. Anyway, this article has a lot of background. It starts with some descriptions of the politics and the history of Albania before the Italian takeover, which, by the way, lasted until 1943, when the Italians were defeated by the Allies in World War II. And then the Germans came in and took over for a brief period in Albania until the end of the war. This article mentions the continuation of political violence in Albania in the 1920s, when they had a president, Ahmed Zagu. I'm going to read you a paragraph from this article. In another long-standing Albanian tradition, Zog, as he was known, was the target of more than 600 declared blood feuds and survived 55 known assassination attempts, the most serious of which was a shootout on the steps of the Vienna State Opera House, in which his accompanying minister was wounded and one of his bodyguards was killed as Zog returned fire at the assassins with his pistol. Well, just another sort of follow-up to my description of the wild and lawless character of Albania, which I began with last time. This is the beginning of a table of contents for the first year or so, slightly more than a year, of Albania, the stamps issued under various authorities. I talked last time about the Vlore government, which was the first one to start issuing stamps. This government was not the only administration in the territory at that point. There were literally competing governments. There was one in central Albania, which also issued stamps that I'll get to later. You see halfway down the table of contents, central Albania, Esad Pasha's first regime, October 1913 to March 1914. But most of the first stamps that you find in stamp catalogs under Albania would be the ones, the issues of the Vlore government. So I'm going to skip ahead through all of these precursors. Remember last time we talked about the Ottoman stamps and the offices of the various powers that had post offices in the Ottoman Empire. Okay, this is a rough draft. I intend to make this map better. This is my first approximation of a map just showing the political situation in Albania, right, at the end of the First Balkan War. The war started in October and it was pretty much over by the end of November. It's very brief. The Balkan allies, Montenegro, Serbia, Greece, and also Bulgaria, not shown here, rather quickly defeated the Turks. That is, they drove them out of most of the territory. The Turks did occupy some of their fortresses and some of the cities for a while longer. Vlore, which is here, was under siege for quite a while and remained within Turkish control. So the map here shows how the forces of Montenegro came down. And by the way, the black lines in this map are the present international boundaries. These boundaries did not exist for the most part. There was a boundary here between the Ottoman Empire and Montenegro. Montenegro had already become independent, but all the rest of this territory on all sides was still Turkish. I've drawn in these boundaries just for reference, so you'll know that this is the Albanian territory we're talking about. The geographical boundaries of Albania are fairly well established historically, with Montenegro on the north, and then this area on the east is very mountainous, and these big lakes, Lake Ohrid and Lake Prespa, and so this territory, this mountainous and these lakes define the boundary between Macedonia on one side and Albania on the other. And then this line on the bottom was the established boundary between Albania and Greece. But this was highly contentious. There were a lot of Greeks living in this area in the southern portion. This is the area that for a while became an independent country known as Epirus. It's actually North Epirus. The southern portion of Epirus is in Greece, but for a brief time before it became absorbed into Albania, this area, which has a lot of Greek population, was independent. When the Serbs, the Greeks, and the Montenegrins attacked the Turks, they more or less drove them toward the sea. This is the Adriatic Sea here on the left, and the dotted red line indicates the area where the Turks were concentrated at the end of the first part of the fighting. There was a truce on December 3rd, 1912, and they still did control Vlore, this seacoast town, one of the major towns in Albania. Last time I described the Albanian nationalists who originally got the idea of setting up a separate independent country. They met originally in Bucharest, and then they transferred their operations to Trieste, and finally came down to Albania. They went first to Durrës, but that was an area not at all friendly to the idea of Albanian independence because the Serbs were in control. And Serbia very much wanted to have this territory so that they would have a seacoast. It was a dream, a fantasy, an ambition of Serbia for centuries to have a seacoast on the Adriatic, but it was never realized. And in the end, they were driven back, and Albania was established as a country. So anyway, the nationalist group came down to Vlore, which was technically still under Turkish control. There were Greek forces all around down here in the area of North Epirus, and there were Greek ships that were literally bombarding Vlore from the sea. But this is where this group of nationalists declared independence on November 28, 1912. And they set up what's known as the Vlore government, which really only lasted about a little over a year. As there were competing governments elsewhere, as I mentioned. This is where in central Albania, where Esad Pasha had his regime. What happened is just after the fighting was stopped by the truce, a meeting was set up of ambassadors from the 6 great powers: Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Austria, and Russia. And the idea was to determine what is to become of this territory. A lot of countries had their eyes on it. Montenegro would have liked to annex this portion. Serbia, as I mentioned, wanted their outlet to the sea, and Greece wanted to annex the portion where a lot of Greeks lived. But in addition to that, the Italians and the Austrians were extremely concerned that the other one not control this area. Italy didn't want Austria to come into power here, and Austria didn't want Italy to. And so they decided the best solution was to let it become independent. Even though that the Albanian nationalists had no army and barely set up a functioning government, and they controlled only a small amount of territory right around Vlorë. Eventually, they were able to extend their control to this region. Berat and Elbasan were controlled from here, but that was all. The rest was held by other forces. So the ambassadors' conference set up something called a control commission, which after a year, a little more than a year, took over control from the Vlorë government. And they were in charge because the Albanians didn't have any way to control territory without the help of the great powers. And so they acquiesced in this plan to have the control commission set up a government, and they ended up inviting a king to come in, a member of the ruling family that has generated most of the kings and queens in Europe. They're all related. The British, the German, the Russian, the Greek, they're all in the same family. And so a distant relative of this family was invited to become king of Albania. But we'll get to that later. Okay, well, enough history for a while. We saw this last time. These are stamps that the Greeks overprinted for the part of the territory that they controlled. And after the overprints, they issued special stamps, which were for all of the territories they acquired from the Ottomans. These 3 cancellations happened to be in Albanian territory. And we saw these, we saw the first and second hand stamps, this being the first. And this, by the way, is a very elusive item, not mentioned by the Scott catalog. I don't know why, but it's hard to find. You rarely see it offered. This is a little more common, although still it's quite valuable. The imprint on the far left there is the actual stamp, and then there are 2 cancellations. And we saw the double eagle overprints. We saw these last time. I wanted to get to a couple more that we didn't see last time. These were some varieties, an inverted overprint and one in red. And so here's the first new item. Here we have something called the oily ink varieties. You see the second and fourth stamps there in the row are very faint and smudgy. There are many stories about this, how this came about, but most experts believe that these are genuine overprints, not forgeries. And there are various explanations of how the ink came to be contaminated with oil so that it made it flow into the paper and create a blurry image. I put 2 of the normal stamps here just for contrast with the oily ink varieties. Now here are some forgeries. The stamp on the far left is a genuine stamp. This is the original genuine overprint. This one happens to be surcharged 10. Apparently they ran low on the 10 para stamps, so they took the 20s and overprinted 10 on some of them. I have a certificate from a recognized Italian expert, Rebaudi, indicating that this is a genuine, if he can be trusted, and I understand that he's, one of the foremost experts and trustworthy authenticator. So the others, these are very, very frequently forged. A lot of the stamps that you encounter in dealers' stocks or online in auctions are forgeries. Some of them are pretty close to the original. You have to carefully examine the lettering, the size of the eagle, the shape of the head and neck. This one, for example, I mean, if you compare it, you can see the shape of this neck on the right is much longer than the stamp in the original stamp. In this one, the whole image is larger and it's actually kind of crudely drawn. You can see the two wings are not symmetrical. In this one, the lettering on the bottom is different. The letters are larger, slightly larger, and the curvature of the inscription is not the same as here. This is slightly more curved than this, so that's another way of detecting the forgery. The final two stamps are ones that were never overprinted, during the period in which these stamps were used. So that's an immediate tip-off that they have to be forgeries, because these were not. These particular stamps from 1905 were not some of the ones that were available for overprinting when it was done in 1913. This is a beautiful item. It's just a Turkish postcard with the Turkish stamp with the Tugra insignia overprinted with the Albanian double eagle, and the June 1913 overprint, or rather hand stamp. This is not a cancellation. This is an example of the hand stamp that was used for postage. So this is really a philatelic souvenir. Obviously, it was never addressed or mailed, but it has examples of the two different kinds of stamps that were available in June of 1913. First the hand stamp and then the overprint. So the next stamps were still pretty crude. In October of 1913, I think the stocks of the double eagle overprints were running low. And so what they did was they used the hand stamp that had been used in June of 1913, this same circular hand stamp, but they added to it a separately hand stamped eagle. That's what this smudge is. It's the Albanian double eagle, and a typewritten indication of the denomination, 10 para, 20 para, done with an elite typewriter by hand. They would stamp a bunch of the hand stamps on a page, put them in a typewriter and type on the denominations. And these are all postmarked in Vlore. Notice it's spelled V-L-O-N-E. I don't know how it happens, but this name is spelled both ways. You see Vlore and Vlone, at least that's how I would pronounce it. It may be that the Albanians pronounce the N and the R the same way, and so you see it both ways. There are 6 stamps. Here are the 1 grosh and 2 grosh. And by the way, a grosh is the same thing as piastres, I understand. So it's para and piastre. And my understanding is that it's 60 para to 1 piastra or 1 grosh. So you never see paras in higher denomination than, say, 30 or 40. And finally, 5 grosh and 10 grosh. And again, sometimes the hand stamping is kind of crude or almost non-existent. It looks like maybe the ink was rather watery here, so the image hardly shows up. I'm going to show now varieties of several of these values. Here are 3 different versions of the 10 para stamp. Notice the difference here. The typeface is the same on these, but this one, second one, has an accent. The story is that they started out putting the accent there, which I guess is technically correct, but they soon tired of that, and so most of the later stamps had no accent over the A. The stamp on the right, I believe to be a forgery. It's a pretty good forgery, but there's several things about it that are suspicious. First of all, it's a different size. If you take out a ruler and measure carefully, the original stamps are 35 millimeters. This one is only 33 millimeters. And then look at the typeface, the 10 para. It's simply a different typeface. The O of the 10 is narrower, and the letters are smaller. Here's the 20 para. These all three are genuine. Just showing some of the varieties that you get. The inscription around the circle is post of the provisional government, and then in the center of Albania, Shqiperia. The one on the right here is one of the few I have used from someplace other than Vlore. This would be Berat, which is it's a nearby fairly major town. The 1 grosh stamp, here in the center, we have an upside down eagle, something that's not seen too much, but occasionally. And on the right is another one of the forgeries. You can see, I think you can even see visually that it's a little smaller, and the typeface is grossly different. And the 2 grosh, and once again, the one on the right is the forgery with a different typeface. And I mean, it's a beautiful print, better looking than some of the originals, but it can't be one of the original hand stamps. All right, now we get to another hand stamp, if you're still with me. This was November 1913, and these are pretty much believed to be philatelically inspired. In other words, there was no real need for the stamps for postal use, but they wanted to do something to commemorate the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And so they issued a new set, once again, with a hand-stamped frame and a separately stamped eagle and inscription of value. Again, there are 6 stamps in this set. This time it's 10 and 20 para and 30 para, and then 1 grosh and 2 grosh. I'm sorry, there are 5. Yeah, 10, 20, 30, 1 grosh and 2 grosh. Here are some varieties. The 20 para. You can see the varieties. The perforations were kind of wild and irregular. So you end up with stamps of all different sizes. The imprint is the same size, but the perforations create many different shapes, which causes a problem, I suppose, for someone like Phil, who creates neat rectangles within which the stamp is supposed to be contained. Most stamps are of a fairly predictable size, but in this case, they're rather wildly irregular. Now, the stamp on the right is actually not a genuine stamp. This is another forgery. And the way I know that, first of all, the perforations are very crude. None of the originals have this type of crude, rough perforation. But also the cancellation. On this, I have a whole set of these. In fact, they're fairly common, with the same cancellation, the same town. I believe it would be something like Lucia, and the same date. The stamps were issued on November 28th, and the cancellation that can't be right is November 5th. Obviously, that can't be right because the stamps hadn't been issued yet. So somebody created these and then backdated them. The 30 para. Now, there are many instances of stamps issued in the wrong colors. For example, here, the 30 para stamp was supposed to be purple, that is the frame purple with a black eagle. Here's one that's blue and another one that's red. These minor varieties errors in color are listed in Scott with somewhat higher value than the basic stamps. Clearly what happened was, they issued the different, they created the different colors for different denominations. And when stamping these 30 piara stamps, they just got the wrong colors. They took a sheet that was meant to be a different denomination and put 30 on it. The red was supposed to be 20, and the blue, I believe, was supposed to be the 1 grosh, if I remember correctly. And once again, on the far right is one of those forgeries. Again, very crude perforations, slightly different typeface, but the same cancellation from Lucia. And the eagle also is different. You can see all these three are all the original hand-stamped eagle. This one is actually quite different looking if you examine the details. It's actually much sharper and clearer than the original. The 1 grosh here, the third stamp has an inverted inscription of value. The 1 grosh is upside down. This stamp looks a bit suspicious, but I believe it's an original. It has the right perforations. It has the right shape of the eagle. Apparently, again, some oil got into the ink and caused it to spread like this and make a blurry image. The one on the far right again is the forgery, and here you can actually just make out the date 5/11/1913, which is an impossible date for that stamp. The 2 grosh, just somewhat different colors. And at last, we get to the first professionally produced stamps of Albania. These were printed in Italy and given basically as a gift to the Vlorë government. The Italians, as I've said before, had their eyes on Albania. They wanted to have influence and control there. And I suppose you could say that the Albanians should have been somewhat suspicious of this gift, but they're nice stamps. On the top, the inscription is Free Albania. And the design is this historic character. It's named Gjergi Kastrioti, famous Albanian hero who for many years held off the Turks and defended the independence of the Albanian realm. The stamps were designed by a Czech designer named Kauch, K-A-U-T-S-C-H. He was originally appointed to design a medal, a commemorative coin or medal with the head of this character, Kastrioti. But that plan fell through, and so the work that he had done was used on the stamp instead. And the inscription here, this man, Kastrioti, went by the sort of honorific title of Skanderbeg. Now you might want to know where that name came from. The beg part on the end is just the Albanian version of the word, usually written bey, B-E-Y, which means a lord or someone in charge of a province or district. Skander is from Alexander. The conquests of Alexander the Great were made such an impression on the territories of the Near East that for centuries his name was revered and used as a sort of honorific for rulers and kings. So Lord Alexander is how you would say this in English. Skanderbeg was the name by which this man was known. The inscription, unfortunately, gets the spelling wrong. So here on the left, it's instead of Skanderbeg, it's Skanderberg, Skanderbergu. He was probably thinking of the man as having a normal name like Steinberg or Goldberg or something like that. The inscription is Skanderbeg, King of the Albanians. And here are some used in different locations: Bologna or Vlore, Shkoder, Dures, Korcha, and Skrapar. This one, the bottom right here, Skrapar, is a rather rare one. It's a small town, so it's probably the most valuable of all these.
Allan, may I interrupt briefly? There's
Please.
a very subtle, interesting, like a rainbow in the background in multiple colors.
That's probably something created by my printer when I scanned these items. It's not on the original stamp. I can assure you
I
that.
see. Okay.
Yeah, it would be
I
nice.
was kind of
yeah,
amazed. It's quite amazing.
Well, that is the end for now.